Welcome. The floor is yours.
Cool. Then
Yeah, should we do just a little quick like language check? What you prefer? Anna-Lena is going to be presenting in English, but is there a preference for maybe speaking Swedish when that isn't the case, or how do you feel?
How do you guys feel? English, Swedish?
Both?
I'm fine with English.
Okay.
I can just add, if you have question or something, you can also ask them in Swedish. I understand Swedish really well. So yeah, you can decide when you ask questions which language you prefer. I will answer in English though. But then otherwise, let's go.
Yeah, super. Do you want to start sharing then, Anna-Lena?
Yes.
Look at that. Fantastic.
Is that already working? Oh. It's always, yeah, here we go.
All right, excellent. So my name is Nicholas Whitmark, and I am here with my wonderful co-host and fellow volunteer Anna-Lena, and we're going to be talking about system change, basically. So what we call it is the Swedish Model 2.0, and this is us. So feel free, Anna-Lena, to take it away.
Yeah, my name is Anna-Lena. I'm a volunteer with Greenpeace. I'm originally from Germany, but now I live in Uppsala, where I study at SLU. I study environmental communication, and I've been doing this for many, many years, for over 8 years now. I'm still very excited about working with Greenpeace. How about you, Nicholas?
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Nicholas, and I've been volunteering for about 2.5 years. I joined like the day after, I think, Jair Bolsonaro was elected the president of Brazil. And for some reason, that seemed to be like the last drop. And there was a bit of panic among my friends because Brazil is, of course, home to the Amazon, the world's lungs. And so that's what prompted it. And I've been doing that. So I've been doing it for about 2.5 years now, and increasingly involved. And the more that I get involved, the more I want to become involved. So it's a very positive, like kretslopp. It's a very positive vortex, so to speak. And yeah, shall we? And I'm doing this for the same reason that pretty much everybody else is doing it. I feel the same sense of climate anxiety that a lot of people do. But as I also host intro meetings for new volunteers. And one of the things that I say is that we should channel our feelings into action instead of just like keeping them bottled up inside. So talking with other volunteers is a really wonderful thing to do. So yeah, I thought I'd start by giving you a quick introduction to Greenpeace as an organization and what it is that we do. And then Anna-Lena is going to talk about the wonder and limits of our world. And then I'm going to hopefully at least introduce some alternatives and talk about what it is that we can in fact do and how we all can help do it together. Right, so this is Greenpeace, and I mean, I think that you reached out to us, so you know who we are. But basically, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, we exist because we believe that the planet deserves a voice, and it needs solutions, change, and above all, action. So our organization is based on a number of different values, but the main ones are nonviolence. So that's basically, I think, where most people know Greenpeace from is nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience. But we are result oriented. So we take on projects that we think that we can win, and we don't give up until we have won. We're politically and economically independent, and that just means that we don't take any money from any political parties, nor do we take money from companies. So it's mainly just small donors. And we are envisa. Now, what's the word for that? We are, yeah, we have this single-minded determination and we don't give up. We're very persistent is the word that I'm looking for.
Stubborn.
Yeah, exactly. So this is basically the pyramid of how it is that Greenpeace works as an organization. And as I said, I think that the main thing that people associate Greenpeace with is what they see when they see us in the media. And that's usually like Anna and my fellow Greenpeacer and friend, Daniel, who sometimes chains himself to an oil rig to bring attention to those types of issues. And that's generally where we get the media attention and where you see us. But most of the organization is actually behind the scenes. So I thought I'd just tell you a quick anecdote, or hopefully quick, about a campaign that didn't necessarily make it into the media that much, but that we sort of won. And it's about H&M, and they were using toxic chemicals all over the world, but primarily in Southeast Asia. And these chemicals, they were very toxic and in the water bodies, so where they would flush out the water from these factories where they were producing clothes, all of the wildlife, and especially the animal wildlife in those water bodies, they were developing long-term diseases. So we brought that to their attention and we compiled a report where we had studies from all sorts of different institutions, and then we'd also taken water samples from outside of these factories. And so that's the part of the research and sort of development part of it. And then we compiled the report and we called Greenpeace. So part of it is, I guess, lobbying, or we called H&M, sorry. And we asked them if we could have a meeting and present these findings. So we had a problem and we had a solution for them. And we said that we understand that these things don't happen overnight. So we told them what was happening, told them another way of going about what they were doing, but that would be a cleaner and more environmentally friendly way of doing it. And then we also said that, again, we understand that this isn't going to happen right away. So we gave them, or we said, you know, we can come up with a timeline, but we want you to commit to this. And they were very kind and polite, as all corporations are. And they said, thank you, but no thank you. And so we coordinated a global campaign about this, and we turned that report into just little leaflets. And then on one day, all over the world, we had volunteers who were handing out leaflets outside of H&M's. And we asked them if they were concerned about this issue, they could bring that up with H&M, kindly and politely, of course, and say that we would like you to change your practices to more sustainable practices. And all of a sudden, all the phones started ringing at the headquarters of H&M, because a store has a duty to report incidents like that to their head office, which has a duty in turn to report those incidents to the head office in Stockholm. And it didn't really take more than a few hours until H&M called us again and said, okay, we're ready to talk. And so that's more or less something that stayed out of the media largely, but in a way where we were able to pressure them into doing the right thing, so to speak. And I think we can move on now.
That's already my part.
Yeah, take it away.
Yeah, because we as Greenpeace, we often like to point out problems. We like to put the finger in the wound and talk about what's going wrong and offer solutions. But sometimes for now, I would like to take a step back and look at why are we doing this actually? Because engagement in these kind of organizations, not just in Greenpeace, but with other organizations, also is usually coming from a place of love. And for me, that's definitely true. I'm engaged because I think our planet is wonderful. And we sometimes have to remind ourselves that that is actually true. And that we are part of this super complex ecosystem that has developed over millions of years, and there's still so much to learn about it. I come from a forestry background, and even though we already know a lot about forests, there's still so much more to learn. We know the species, yes, but we do not know how they interact. And every year there's new research coming out, and we really keep on building this knowledge about how complex our world actually is. And we have gone through a crazy development ourselves as well. And yeah, fossil fuels are kind of the problem now, but we should also remember how much they have changed our world so far. With the combustion engine becoming more widely available, our lives have changed like crazy. If you compare, for example, how far you have traveled, and compare that with how far your grandparents have traveled when they were your age, that is a huge difference. I had that conversation with my grandma when I was 20, and of course I had been to other countries. It's pretty normal when you're 20 that you have traveled across borders. But for her, when she was 20, she had been to the next closest city, which was like 50 kilometers. So really this having cars and industrialization changed our way of living completely. Suddenly we could move quickly, and not just us, but also goods. So we have deeper trading relationships than ever before. And the standard of living has risen quite a bit for many people. And it even took off pressure off some of our ecosystems. With the fossil fuels coming up, we could stop burning the forests just for heating and for cooking. So we really had some positive effects here. But everything going faster also had its downsides, and we are not so good at measuring progress, and we're not so good at deciding like what progress actually means. Right now, we kind of use the GDP to look at how we are progressing. GDP, gross domestic product, which measures the services and products produced in the country in 1 year. And a rising GDP is kind of, yeah, that's great, that's progress. But is it really? Because GDP, well, it doesn't really measure, for example, how the wealth is distributed. And that's something that we see not just in Sweden, but everywhere. The rich get richer, the poor stay poor. And we see huge differences between different countries. The global north is consuming way more than the global south. So inequality is still there, and it's getting worse in many places. And the GDP also doesn't look at quality of life, how the costs of living, how much time you have, your working conditions. All of these things are not considered. It's really just a capitalist way of looking at things. And we need to think about, how do we actually define progress? What do we want? What kind of future do we want to live in? How do we want to work? And what is well-being? Because right now, with the GDP as the only tool to measure progress, that just drives this paradigm of growth. And it drives us to produce more, to want more, and to consume more. But now we're seeing the boundaries of that, because, well, we live in a world that has boundaries, and we see the consequences of us crossing these boundaries the whole time. So I want to quickly go through this model of planetary boundaries. Have you seen this before? Oh, I see some shaking heads, so I'm going to go through it a little bit. So this model has 9 different categories. And the idea is that if we would stay here in the green zone, that's the zone in which humans and nature can thrive. However, with our actions, we do influence these different zones. And whenever we overshoot, and we overshoot in quite a few already, that starts a process. These processes are really hard to stop once they start, and it can it messes with our ecosystems and the balance of the whole planet, because all of these areas are also connected. And I have an example for you, because it's quite abstract, this model. Let's look, for example, at land system change. Land system change is when you, for example, cut down a forest to make room for agriculture. That's something that we see a lot in the Amazon region, for example, the Amazon being cut down to produce, to make space for grazing areas for cattle, or to grow soy, which is then fed to cattle. And by doing that, we take away the ability of the forest, since we're cutting it down, to take up carbon. And that, of course, influences climate change. More carbon ends up in the atmosphere, and so the atmosphere changes, and that has a lot of consequences. Let's just look at ocean acidification, because more carbon in the atmosphere means that the oceans take up more carbon as well. And that has effects as well. More carbon in the oceans means that more carbonic acid is being produced in the oceans. So the oceans get more acidic. And that, of course, has other consequences, especially to very small organisms like corals, plankton, krill. These organisms might not be able to live in those kind of conditions anymore. And since they form the basis of the whole food chain, that sets off a whole, a whole chain of reactions that can influence the fish population and so on and so forth. So the biosphere integrity. We now live in a time of the 6th mass extinction, which is caused by us, which is not a great record, to be honest. And though we can go on with this whole model, because of course, if the fish stocks go down, we have an influence on the geochemical flows, and that might influence land system change, and so on and so forth. So all of these categories are connected. And what we need to do is to find a model to live on this planet and to stay within these boundaries, within this green area. And for that, we need to change quite a lot. Let's look at some examples where we're overshooting. For example, agriculture. When I think of agriculture, I like to think of a cow on a green meadow, and it's happily grazing, and then the farmer comes and milks it and so on. But that's not the reality. The reality is what we see in the picture. That's a factory farm, and 90% of the meat that we consume comes from a farm like this. So again, this is something driven by our idea of progress, by being more efficient and so on. And this is really efficient, but it has severe consequences, not just for the environment, but also for people, because, well, we outcompeted small farms without really making up for it. So working on these farms is not exactly a nice job, and it's not exactly well paid. But still, the thought of efficiency has really driven the development of these kind of factory farms. And they have huge consequences for the environment. For example, climate change. These factory farms, huge emissions coming from them. Biosphere integrity. Of course, we need to make space for these kind of places. So that's land system change that takes away habitats from other animals. They use up a lot of fresh water, and so on and so forth. So this is really one of the big problems.
Anna-Lena,
yeah?
what does the picture show us? I couldn't really...
Oh, it's a factory farm. So this is where cows are being held, for example. Okay. Like you can see a lot of tiny cows here. It can be like 10,000s of cows in these kind of farms. And even though we see consequences of the way we treat nature and the way we do business, we still keep on doing it like that. These are pictures from Germany, where I'm from. And I said I have a background in forestry, so this is always very personal to me, because this is what our forests have started to look like in the last years. With climate change and the changing of the rain patterns and so on, we have lost a lot of the monocultures. So the forests that are just one species grown so we can make a lot of profit. And that's again this idea of progress, of producing a lot. That's when we plant these monocultures and they fail. But still, we replant them, even though we know this is not a good idea. And here in Sweden, if you look at the forests, that's what you see, these kind of monocultures. And we really need to change it, because if our forests start to look like that, it influences a whole lot. It influences climate change. These kind of areas cannot take up carbon anymore. Habitats are lost, so biosphere integrity is being influenced. Land system change, well, this is not a forest anymore, and fresh water as well. So we really need to overthink everything. But we don't, and that's the weird part about it. If we really want to hit our 2-degree target, we need to reduce our production of oil, gas, and coal by 6% each year. But we don't even plan for that. We plan instead for an increase of 2%, because we plan for growth. Growth is still more important than sustainability, with all of its consequences, which we can see here. Like our use of fossil fuels kind of influences everything. And part of this problem is that we seek small solutions. We only address the symptoms because we kind of forget that everything is connected. And that's this very complicated thing we see here on the right. And I just want to give an example of how everything is connected. For example, climate action failure. If we fail to address climate change, that amongst others will lead to more extreme weather events. For example, heavy rainfalls, droughts, and so on. Heavy rainfalls and floods can wash away fields, can destroy harvests, which can lead to food crisis, which can lead to social unrest and even war, which can lead to people having to leave their homes. So everything is connected, and we need to stop just trying to treat symptoms. But that's just what we do. We like to put everything in boxes and treat it separately, even though it is connected. These are our environmental goals, and Sweden has failed spectacularly at it. So we have these 16 environmental goals, and we have managed to achieve one. Which one have we achieved? Oh, we managed to protect the ozone layer. Very good. We have nearly met the one about radiation, and all others have failed. Because when you think in these boxes, it's very easy to say like, oh, well, if we don't meet the goal of levande skogar, well, maybe we meet the goal of frisk luft, then it's fine. But that's lazy thinking, because these two are obviously connected. If you have levande skogar, it will totally influence your air. And you probably cannot have frisk luft without levande skogar. So we need to really start thinking holistically and connect all these dots and change not just small things, but big things. Because we already see the consequences of the way we're dealing with the planet at the moment. We see other countries, I mean, Sweden is quite lucky with fresh water, for example. We have a lot of fresh water here, but we can see it in South Africa, in California, and in other countries that every year they kind of run out of fresh water. We see more environmental disasters. We see people who have to leave their home countries. And a lot of it is due to how we act. So that was the depressing part. Let's see what we can do about it. Nicholas, what can we do?
Yeah, thank you. That's quite a setup. So yeah, I forgot to say a couple things. And one is that we really hope to make this as interactive as possible. So please interrupt me if you have any questions whatsoever or just thoughts about what I'm saying. And then I also have a confession to make that the things that Anna-Lena just went through, I don't really read much of this stuff myself. I've read enough to know that it's real and that it's very bad and getting worse, but I honestly stay away from most sort of environmental and climate news, because I find it so incredibly depressing. And I do focus a lot on instead what we can do about it. So before we get into the alternatives, I just thought I'd take a little step back and talk about our society and what it looks like. And far as I could tell, I think that Individuell Människohjälp is a democratic organization. So what is a democracy? Well, democracy is just a decision-making mechanism in which every person in society has an equally weighted vote. So there are, of course, people who are extremely wealthy and who have temporary decision-making authority, and it can seem as though they have more power than us, but everybody has an equally weighted vote. That means that, at least technically, society and the way that it looks is the way that it looks because we allow it to be that way. Because all of the social institutions, they exist because we allow them to exist. So democracy has changed a lot over time, and it's always expanding, and I hope that it will expand even further, and that's something that I work with personally. But so the first democracy was just white slave-owning men, or at least slave-owning men, and then it progressed, and now it is what it is today. But it's just a mechanism, and without combining it with morals and values, then it doesn't really mean much. But yeah, you can go on to the next slide. And this democracy, that's what gives us the power. So we each have an equally weighted vote, and we live in a democracy. That means that we are the ones that hold power. So power in our society is effectively just an understanding of the position that we have. If you have the awareness to understand that power does in fact lie with us through the knowledge that we do have that power and by working with other people, and that it does not lie with the people who nominally hold power, so politicians and business leaders, then you are instantly empowered, because just realizing that you have power is empowering. They are only allowed to sit where they sit because we allow them to sit where they sit. And I know that these are very, very simple concepts and can seem like, duh, why are you saying this? But because most of us forget it. Most of us look at or see the news and they see decision makers or so-called decision makers, and they forget, or we all forget, that we are in fact the power in society. So the decisions are ultimately our responsibility. So getting involved is the answer. And we can go, right, so this is, how do we go about protecting our wonderful world? Well, the world looks the way that it does because a series of decisions have been made. So it's easier to think of this not in terms of systems, if it's this system or that system, but as a series of decisions. And of course, there's a lot of ideology underlying the decision-making process, but just see it as a series of decisions. And every day, all over the world, thousands of these decisions are being made, and they affect, in the end, every last person on Earth. Most of those decisions, and this is crucial, are made under what are at least technically democratic circumstances. Unfortunately, right now, most of those decisions are being made by a very narrow group of people serving a very narrow set of interests, but it doesn't have to be that way. So for each of the decisions that are being made, there are a set of approaches, so to speak, or options. And some of those options are better than the other options. So some of the options are more inclusive, they're more sustainable, they're more forward thinking, they're more equal, and so on and so forth. So through collective democratic engagement, meaning we all work together and we use the power that we actually do have, we can influence those decisions, just like they're being influenced today by a very narrow set of people for a very narrow set of interests. We collectively can influence those decisions and make sure that the decisions are made for everybody. And the more of us there are that get involved, the more, or the quicker these decisions, we can influence these decisions. And we can make sure that the decisions that are in fact taken are the ones that are more inclusive, more sustainable, more equitable, more forward thinking, and so on. So it can be overwhelming to think about these things and system change and so on, but think of it as a long series of decisions instead. And after enough of these decisions have been made, then we do have what's called system change. And that is the alternative. So right now, as Anna-Lena mentioned, what is driving what she described is gross domestic product. And that's a concept that was first conceptualized in the 1930s. And the person who came up with the concept, an American economist named, I think, Simon Kuznets, when he introduced that concept, he said that this is a very, very limited concept. And it only measures income. It doesn't measure well-being. It doesn't measure anything else in society. And it is a very simplified measurement of an incredibly complex system or system of systems. But it doesn't have to be what drives the our society. As I said, the power, we live in a democracy, so this is all up to us. New Zealand, for example, in 2018, they introduced what's called the well-being budget. So for every decision that is made in New Zealand, when you are requesting money in a budget for a certain thing, then you have to prove that what you're requesting money for has an intergenerational effect. So that's what they call it. So it doesn't just... Did somebody have a question?
Is it your microphone that's doing weird echoes?
Yeah, it's Clara who just entered the meeting, but I unmuted her.
Okay. So yeah, they have this well-being budget, and so they have to think intergenerationally. And so they have to say, okay, we're making this decision now, and this decision will hopefully improve our lives now, but those improvements won't come at the expense of other generations down the line. So again, we want to make this as interactive as possible, and we want to see if you have any thoughts about, I think that's the next thing there. I'm not sure how much you've thought about this, but there are lots of ways to measure well-being in a society. And if you have any thoughts or considerations about how we could go about doing it, and it doesn't have to be an overall measurement, it could just be things that we should include in when we are measuring a society. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Well, there could be many things, but I think one thing is also this feeling that you can affect change. You talked about democracy, but I do think that many people, especially young people, perhaps feel that we're in a bit of a crisis of democracy as well, because it's not that easy to always get engaged or get your voice heard or something like that. And then also there are a lot of right-wing movements popping up, and people say in our sector that we've backtracked 15 years or something in democracy globally and so on. But I think the feeling that you can affect change would contribute to well-being somehow.
Yeah, that's a really, really wonderful point, and I completely agree with you. It's a very suffocating system where we are meant to be, or at least that's the effect of the system. Whether that's the intention or not is up to anybody to decide. But the effect of the current system is exactly what you're talking about. It is what they call in English atomization. So we live in an individualized society. And we simply have all these anxieties, but we don't necessarily realize that other people also have them. So what gives me hope, or examples of what gives me hope, is that I understand that other people are also thinking about these things. Just you reaching out to us, that's an example of engagement and involvement. And bigger examples are, for example, Greta Thunberg. As soon as she did what she did, I mean, it didn't take long before she had a global movement going. And that means that people want to see this change, but there's a frustration, like you said, because right now we sort of rely on politicians. And those politicians, unfortunately, don't end up serving us because we don't put the right pressure on them. Whereas the business community, they are highly structured and highly organized. They work exactly the same way that Greenpeace does. They're just far better at it at the moment than we are. And the process is exactly the same. It's pressure on politicians, and they know how to put that pressure on. Whereas when Greta Thunberg ignites this global movement, then you do see change. One of the most impressive things in recent history is the American sort of version of Greta Thunberg, the Sunrise Movement. It's like their Fridays for Future. They got the Green New Deal to get onto the agenda because they made an organized push to politicians, and they got some very popular politicians involved, and they managed to get that on the agenda. That's an enormous achievement, and that's tremendous progress. And it was all done because of people like us. And the George Floyd protests from last summer, that also indicates that there are tens of millions of people who are willing to go out into the streets and demand change. And it does, it leads to change. So I totally understand, and this is what I sort of battle all the time, especially in intro meetings, that there is a feeling of disempowerment. And what I try to get across to people is that it doesn't have to be that way. I totally understand the feeling. It's just that it's not accurate. I mean, I'm not contesting your feelings. The feelings are up to each one of us to have. But I just mean that it is based on something that isn't true. We do have power. We're just not using it collectively. So I totally, totally agree with you. And this is what we'd love to discuss with you as well, is to how we can inspire more people to get involved. All right, and so this is basically the main alternative that we are focusing on. There's lots of different alternatives for all sorts of different things, but this ties in with the infographic that Anna-Lena showed you earlier. So on the outside, we have the 9 different tipping points, so to speak. And then the green space in the middle is what they call the donut. It's called donut economics. And that is where we are providing what's in the inner circle. So those are the things that we need to survive as a society. So we need food and water, and we need social equality. We need energy, we need jobs, education, gender equality, and to have our health and so on. And to provide all of those things and yet to live within the planetary boundaries, we need to think in a circular pattern. So the economy as it's set up right now is basically what's called take, make, use, and lose. So you take from the earth, you make something, you use it, and then you throw it away. And because of this GDP measurement, GDP is an exponential measurement, so it always has to grow by definition. That means that we are going to be using more and more and more resources. And unless we start putting those resources back into use, so first of all, reducing the extractivism, and then emissions, and then also reusing and recycling the materials so that it becomes sort of a kretslopp, and it becomes a positive vortex. And this is possible. We are transitioning into this as we speak. It just needs to happen quicker. So this is an area that we could collectively pressure politicians into, whenever they're doing something, to make sure that they incorporate the principles and values of a circular economy, where we reuse and recycle things instead of just making things and throwing them away. And I think you can move on. So this is it's hard to know. You have to pick and choose what to focus on, but I just figured that this was a good one to have. So travel and mobility. So again, because of this GDP and also the profit motive, I didn't really get into that, but that's what drives companies. So an internal company is driven by profit motive, and it just means, just like GDP, that you have to always be making more money. It doesn't have to be that way. There are alternatives for it, but that drives this. So we're constantly being told to buy more cars and to travel more, and we're seeing advertisements about that all the time. And then what we suggest is that we should have a big push towards so far more collective transport, and there should be, that transport should be electrified. And then of course, we have to consider the rural areas as well. I don't know if everybody here is in Stockholm or where people are, but there's a general sort of attempt by various politicians and by various business interests. It's sort of this divide and conquer approach. And they want to put people like me against people in the rural areas and say that my interests clash with their interests, but they don't. It's our world, it's a collective world. And I want people in the rural areas to do well. We're not just an environmental movement, we want everybody to be able to live dignified lives. So what we want is basically just a focus on collective solutions. And that is trickier in rural areas, but it is possible to change. And this is another one of those things. And Andrea, the point that you made about the sort of feeling of hopelessness, one of the things that I usually talk about is that today's society is proof that we can in fact succeed, and that collective democratic involvement and participation leads to change. So women won the right to vote after a nearly 70-year battle, at least in America, and it was granted in 1920. And that was by working together. And just as a reminder, and I know that this isn't like meant to be shaming anybody for not getting involved and like, oh, other people are worse off or whatever, but it is worth pointing out that those women, when they were fighting for their right to vote, they were second-class citizens. They did not have any rights. So even fighting for the right to vote, they were engaging in illegal activity, but they managed. And then Gandhi, he freed India, from the Brits. And one of the more controversial things, at least I think so, that he's ever said is that we must not hate the Brits. They did not take India from us, we gave it to them. And that's a very, very provocative thing to say. And it also turned out to be true, because when acting collectively, they solved the problem, so to speak, or they gained independence. Martin Luther King, him giving a speech right there, that's an example of him breaking the law. So he and all of the other amazing civil rights fighters, they were putting themselves on the line to fight for their rights. And another thing about power, as amazing as Martin Luther King is as a figure, and as amazing as Gandhi is and Greta are as figures, what gives them power is the people in the background there of the picture with Martin Luther King. That's people. He has people behind him. He has the public behind him. That's what gave him power. And that's where it comes from. So it's us. And again, as amazing as a figure as he is, it would not have been possible without the public. The most recent of these amazing victories was the LGBTQ, the rights. And then as far as the future is concerned, what side are we on? And we are all, I think, on the side of getting involved and making sure that that things change in the right direction. But anyhow, I'll open it up now for discussion and questions. Oh yeah, sorry, last side, that this, yeah, doing this is what's good for nature is good for us. So we should be working in a symbiotic relationship. We don't have to ruin nature to get by. We can live in symbiosis, and in fact, that would be a much nicer life. And if we want a future, we have to learn to do so. Yeah, so getting involved. I have some suggestions, and I got some suggestions from some of our campaigners, and I can email those to you. But there are certain campaigns that you can take a look at and see if you'd like to get more involved in. And then other things that, like, it seems like small steps, but they're really not. So there's a concept called medlemsbank, a credit union. And there are two examples of that in Sweden, Ekobanken and Jak. And both of those banks, when you get an account with them, you become a member of the bank. And that means that you have a vote in that bank. So not only do you have a vote in that bank, that means that you have a direct vote in the institution or in the financial sector. And you don't get that with other banks. You can buy shares in another bank and maybe get votes, but there are other people who have more votes and they'll outvote you. So this is a bank, these are banks that you can get involved with, and they do have a focus on sustainability and the future. So fairfinanceguide.se, you can go in there and see if that's something that you might want to consider. And then I can also send you a link about I'm not sure how relevant that is to you right now, but to moving the personal part of your pensions to fossil-free investments, which is also something worth considering for the future. But anyhow, I'll stop babbling now and open it up for questions and discussions and thoughts.
I have a question. I'm wondering what you are most worried about today.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that the number one battle that we have, or I guess there are two of them, but the number one battle I think is mindset. It's cynicism. It's very, very, very difficult sometimes to prove to someone that they do have power. And I think that, and I understand it completely, because we're constantly being beaten down, sort of, so to speak, by society in many, many, many different ways. And there's a sort of, the system that we have now is quite, it's like bullying, it's like mobbing. And if I say that, oh, maybe we shouldn't be doing it this way, or maybe we should be doing it another way, then I'll get attacked for doing that. And that there's going to be all sorts of pileups and this, that, and the other. And that leads to cynicism. So I think cynicism is the biggest, that's just my personal opinion, blockade to it. Because if everybody was able to just brush that off and say, no, it's ridiculous. It's we have to change and we can change and let's do that. Then yeah, you'd see change come about very quickly. So Greta inspires us all to get involved. And when she holds her rallies, that's an example of what we could have, and we could just have it more often, and then we would see change very quickly. What about you all? What do you think?
I'm personally worried about the people who are denying the situation. No matter how many facts you give them about everything, they just deny everything and tell us that we are stupid and that we are being brainwashed by the scientists, and not all the scientists are correct. The scientists are lying to you just to make you do in the other way. That's my biggest worry right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it's often like when you say that they don't believe the facts, is often you talk about values instead of facts, because like giving them the facts kind of attacks their values. It's something that you see a lot when you talk to foresters. If you tell them like we should change the forestry system, what you effectively tell them is your life's work has been wrong, and that's not something that like no one likes to hear that. And yeah, it can be really challenging to have those conversations. But then again, it's something like, as Nicholas said, like finding these solutions together and giving space and time for people to wrap their head around the idea that we all have made mistakes in the past, but it's time to look forward and try to find new ways of doing things without putting blame on people, because unless, I mean, some people are different, but many people think they are doing the right thing. And they, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And just a comment that builds on what you were talking about there. And I agree. I totally feel the hopelessness of the deniers. But a really important point, and a lot of this stuff does come down to just our understanding and awareness of it, is that those people, it's a very, very small percentage. I mean, I know that there are more people who probably vote for like those types of parties, but not necessarily everybody who votes for it believes that there is no such thing as climate change. So it's a very, very, very small percentage of people. And again, in a democracy, it's 50% plus one, and we win. And public sentiment, public polls, if you just look at where public opinion lies, it is on our side. It is making a better future. So I totally understand and agree, but don't be like, don't get dismayed, and don't give up just because they a couple of idiots say something. But that's easier said than done. But yeah, again, anybody else? What do you think the problems are, and what do you think that the solution is? I'd love to hear what you think.
For me, sometimes I feel like it's like, I don't know if there's a possibility to turn back. Like we have went too far with how we have treated the planet, and it feels like there is no, we can't really turn it back like it was, like, because everyone is dependent on like the system we have now. What is kärnkraftverk?
Nuclear power plants.
Yeah, nuclear power plants and stuff, and we have to come up with other solutions that is better for the environment, but it takes time and it takes money. And like this is a question I think where many relies on the politicians. And I also think like what Soraya was saying, maybe there are a lot of people who are denying climate change, but I think it's a problem with those who are really much aware of it, and they say that they care about it, and of course everyone do, but no one is really interested in doing anything themselves. And I think that's a huge problem, where it would be good if the politicians could do something like plastic bags, higher the prices. I think that was awesome. Like I've been using my own bag and brought bags from home since my dad used to do that all the time. When I was a kid, he had them in his pockets. It was like, oh, here's a bag. And I was like, that's so smart. Like, so I've done it since I was like probably 14. But I'm like, just small stuff. And I don't think anyone mind, because I worked at Systembolaget, and there the bags costs a lot. And everyone's like, no, this is good. Like, they're not complaining. Like, so I actually would love the politicians to do more concrete stuff that can affect everyday life and won't affect people that bad because they have a choice to bring their own bag. They don't have to buy, you know, like easy solutions for everyone to join the, how do you say, the climate change like actions.
Yeah, great points. I totally agree, and I think that that is a bit of a problem too. Even I mean, we are from Greenpeace, and we're speaking on Greenpeace behalf. But you have to realize the limitations of every organization, and there needs to be a collaboration between organizations and politicians, and working in to bring about those changes, so that they're not just excellent choices like you know, using a canvas bag or something, but that it becomes bigger, collective, so that infrastructure investments are made, and that those infrastructure investments are made, they are sustainable. So not expanding the refinery in Gothenburg, the oil refinery there, but leading to actual sustainable developments. But yeah, the politicians, they do act. It's just that they act on the people who put pressure on them now, which is mainly the business community. So join. That's like the best thing that you can do is to, and we're not in competition with any of the other organizations. We work with them. So please feel free. I mean, this is an enormous first step, and everybody should like feel really good about this first step, and just please keep it up. Keep on, like join Fältbiologerna or whoever it might be. There are dozens of these organizations, and once you get involved, then you can just think of other things to get involved in as well. And once you get involved, you find that there are so many people, more of us than there are of the, you know, people who don't want to do things. And the others, does anybody else want to add of what they think is wrong or what we could do better? No? Then I can.
And I'm gonna add that there are already like positive examples out there. Niklas briefly talked about New Zealand with its well-being budget. So these solutions are there and they work. And then there's, for example, Bhutan. I used to work there. They have their gross domestic happiness, where they ask people, like every year there's like a survey, and they ask people about their happiness, and that's what their policy is about, because they say like the national happiness is more important than the gross domestic product. So these examples are out there, and they have been tested for years. And we need to start thinking outside the box and find new solutions.
I'm happy that you mentioned that, because when you were talking about the well-being and how we measure well-being, I was thinking about that happiness. It's like well-being is sometimes not measured in money or how much you earn. It's actually can be measured in how happy you are. Some people who don't have a lot of money can be more happy than the person who is very rich. And actually we did a workshop at IAM about just happiness, and it was really good. And that made me really thought a lot about like well-being. Like you said, Annalise, like think outside the box. It's not only has to be about the money, and you don't always need to think profit as money. And that I think we need to talk to all the companies, like money is not everything. But of course, if you want to be successful in your company, money is everything. But for the people in the society, I think happiness is more important than everything else. But I have a question about something else. How do you know anything about the COVID-19, how much it has affected on the environment? Do you know anything about that and can comment?
Like how our change behavior has affected the emissions and something like that?
Yes.
I know that Germany has met its climate targets for the first time in 2020 because people stayed home. So So yeah, that happened. But and I think, like, of course this pandemic is terrible, but I hope that some changes will stay, like being more flexible with how we work, having more opportunities to work from home, for those who want that, and then thinking more about how we travel, where we go, how often, and these kind of things, that we might get some systemic changes from that without all those negative things that this pandemic has brought us.
Yeah, excellent. And building on the happiness comment, that's another one of these important things, like with the whole bullying atmosphere, that don't let people tell you that it isn't possible, because it is possible. And there are, as Anna-Lena said, examples of it. So there's a sort of a thing among politicians and economists that if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. And yet we all know that obviously we all have happiness and love and all of these wonderful things. And no, there's no way of measuring that, but they do exist and we should be striving for them. So yeah, don't let anybody tell you that these things aren't possible. It's just up to us to collectively figure out how we want it to go about.
Thank you so much, Anna-Lena and Niklas, for this session. It was really, really interesting. I've learned a lot, and it has made me think a lot about my way of living and how I can be a better person to make a change. And also, nothing is impossible. Everyone can make a change. So thank you for that.
Thank you everybody for coming. This is, again, it really is a big first step in getting involved, and I urge all of you to keep on going and to look at other organizations and just see how you might be able to do it, because collectively that's how it happens. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And if you can, please send us some like points on how we can, I don't know, live better, like the bank example that you gave us. That would be awesome. Then I can send it to other people here in I'm Young.
Yes, definitely, we will do that.
Thank you so much for tonight.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll keep in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Have a nice weekend.